What is going on, everybody? This is TAETRO, your electronic music mentor, and I'm clearly not in the home studio today. I have rented this Airbnb out in the woods to try to get some inspiration from a new environment. And since many of you liked my previous videos of the uncut music production process explained, I wanted to go ahead and make another one of those videos. But as I got into it, I found that I wanted to split it into 3 parts to go a little bit deeper than the last time I made one of these. So if you're interested in the process of making a track from complete scratch, follow along with this video, with this series that I'll be putting out over the next few weeks, and I think you'll be able to make some progress and fill in the gaps where they may be in your process. Today's video is going to be sponsored by Unison, who just put out a free MIDI pack with 300 different chord progressions and individual chords for you to use in your productions. So that is free. The link is in the description, and we're actually going to be using that today as the jumping off point for the track. So make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because this first video is part of a 3-part series where we're going to go all the way from scratch to making a finished, fully arranged beat. Without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so as we get started here, the first thing you'll probably notice is my Ableton Live template probably looks different than yours. That's because, and I highly encourage you to do this too, is as I've gotten to know my own workflow, the types of plugins, the types of tracks that I kind of need for my tracks, I tend to use the same things a lot, or at least the same template. So I've developed my own template here that's basically got a lot more than I might need for one particular track, but it has all the main plugins and things that I generally use. Tracks have individual racks on them. My basic audio processing rack, I did a whole video on how to make that for yourself. So I've got obviously a drums version of that. I've got a drum rack set up, tracks for my drum samples individually, and then various different instruments, as well as audio tracks for adding in other types of samples. You don't have to do this right away as you start producing, but it's something to think about. And whenever you're ready, you can just build a blank template yourself and go to File, Save, Live Set as Template. You can have multiple templates that you can recall at different times, or you can even save a default template, which is what I've done here. This helps me get up and running just a little bit faster. So today I want to be making a lo-fi beat, and I've noticed in my workflow I don't tend to use a lot of piano, and I want to try to use a little more piano. I've got this cabin vibe going here, so I want more of that kind of classic lo-fi chill vibe. So let's start with some piano. So I'm going to go over into my library here, and of course you can go under instruments and search for piano. But I have a really nice plugin from Arturia. If I go under plugins and I just search piano, we'll find it. It's just a really nice sounding piano. And I'm going to click and drag this onto one of my empty MIDI tracks here. And we've got that initial American grand piano, but obviously there's a lot to choose from. I'm just going to leave it on this very basic one here. Let's arm it so I can hear what it sounds like. Totally fine. I might add some reverb or something to it. But let's just stick with that. Let's keep things really, really simple. Now I've got my Akai MPK Mini here, which of course is not a grand piano. It's a little mini 25 key keyboard, and this will be really helpful. I could play chords on this, but it's really helpful for playing in drums, playing in different melodies. But a lot of the times I like to start my tracks with chord progressions, and one of the best ways, easiest ways I've found is from this MIDI pack that we have here today from Unison. So if I go to my sample packs folder, I've got this new free MIDI pack, which you can all get. It has available all 12 keys, and within each of the keys you can get access to the relative major and minor, as well as individual chords and chord progressions. Chord progressions are what I'm most interested in, and these are all just MIDI. So this is I can put these on this piano track that I've just created, and we can be up and running with a chord progression in no time. So let me drag this in here and see how this sounds. I realize that my template is set to a BPM of 170. That's for like the faster trap and pop stuff that I tend to make, but let's lower things down here a bit and let's go to 70 BPM. Let's just hear how that sounds. Now I've dropped in that chord progression here. It's a really nice, sweet chord progression. sounds very hard though, so there's ways we can go in and edit some of this MIDI. I can double click into this, and we notice that these velocity levels here at the bottom are all level. They're all at the same level, and that is adjusting how hard or soft those notes are getting hit. So let me Command A, select all of these tracks, all of these notes, I should say, and bring down the velocity because this is a chill lo-fi track. So hear the different sound now. Much softer. For comparison, let me bring that up. Much harder. So I'm going to bring it down to be fairly soft so we can get that chill vibe. Such a sweet chord progression. Now, there are other ones. That one is like kind of the most complex here in this pack, but we've got the basic one too. This might sound pretty familiar. So many of you might recognize these chord progressions. The thing about chord progressions is you can't copyright a chord progression. That's why we hear many, many different songs with similar chord progressions. Not to mention, you can play sort of the same progression. You notice these Roman numerals here, 1, 3, 6, 4, 6. You can play that in any key, which is what we'll kind of find in this pack, that there are chord progressions that have the same Roman numerals, they're just in a different key. And that's a music theory lesson for another day. But that's why this is a great jumping off point. You know, chord progressions there's lots of very common chord progressions. There's lots of ways of taking common chord progressions and making them your own, which is something that we're going to do here. So why don't we work in G major today? And I really like that advanced chord progression, but let's check out this intermediate one here just to hear what it sounds like. I don't know if it's the vibe I'm going for, but oh. That one would probably fit really well for some like EDM, more powerful tracks. But hey, why don't we actually jump in and use the basic one for now? So again, I'm just dropping this on my piano instrument. The notes are there ready for me. I'm going to go ahead and select all the notes, Command A, and let's bring down the velocity. So all of a sudden you see we've got a starting point for our track. And now we're going to work a little more with these notes and maybe make this chord progression a little more our own. But first, why don't we start to get some type of rhythmic groove going so we have an overall feel for the track. So I have my own sample packs folder set up here, which I highly encourage you to do. Stay organized with your samples, because what that allows me to do is go into this folder and I can type something in like shaker. And then I've got all these subfolders. Each of these holds some type of either shaker sound or shaker loop. So why don't I just scan through and let me see what I have from this Lo-Fi Jams complete sample pack. We've got percussion and textures. Some softer. And since we are at 70 BPM, I have to take that into account. Some of these are at much higher tempos, so the time will tend to get stretched. For instance, if I drop this one in here, let's see how it sounds, even though it's going from its original tempo of 136 to 70. It's okay, but it doesn't quite fit. Let's see if we can find one from another pack. And then here we have one-shots. This is a couple different ways of working. Sometimes you can either start with a loop or you can program your own one-shots. We're going to get into programming drum one-shots in a minute, but I really just want a loop that is going to set the tone for us, I guess you could say. This sample is closer to our original BPM. All right, so I found this sample actually, which is pretty nice. It's more of a muffled sound, which I think will fit the tone of this a lot better. Now I've got an EQ on this track, and since we are going for a lo-fi feel, I'm gonna roll off even more of the highs. And probably take out some more of these lows. This is gonna help me in the mixing process later. I don't want too much mud in my mix. It definitely doesn't need to be that loud either. But at least now we have like a rhythmic groove going here. One thing I haven't even talked about yet is that we're working in arrangement view, which is something that's kind of new for me, but I find it's a lot easier to get to an end product by starting an arrangement view. And we could still work in a loop. So I've set my brackets here to 4 bars, which is a good size loop to start working with. And if I click this button right up here and these brackets are set correctly, we'll just loop on these 4 bars. Okay. Let's start programming some proper drums here. Now, I could put them into a drum rack, but today I'm going to lay out the samples right here in arrangement view with this drum group that I have. So, still in my sample packs folder, let's go ahead and find a kick. Of course, I'll have tons of kick samples, but I should be able to find a more lo-fi vibe. This one is called Sad. Let's see what's in here. Drum shots, one shots are like single samples as opposed to loops. Number 2, that's simple enough. I'm not trying to spend hours and hours selecting sounds. If something sounds pretty good, I'm probably going to go with it. And what will also be helpful is if I can find a good perk sound. So let me find like perk. I'm not necessarily looking for a big high level snare right now. I'm looking for something more percussive. Now these are from I like these perks that I have in my sample pack actually. These kind of rim sounds. That stick sound is pretty good. So I'm thinking it's a lo-fi track, right? And if I think about all the lo-fi tracks that I really like, many of them feature a kick and a snare pattern with the snare on 2 and 4. So I noticed that the beat numbers are up here. So for bar 1, beat 2 is here. For bar 1, beat 4 is here. So let me go ahead, duplicate that, slide it over. And now I'm not going to think too hard about this. I'm just going to highlight this entire section with the beats 2 and 4 and duplicate. Command D to duplicate. Works just like a word processor, kind of like with copy and paste. You highlight a word or you highlight a section and you can duplicate it across the timeline. So now that I have that snare pattern set, I'm actually going to bring this down in the mix a little. And actually overall, for all the drums, I want to shave off some high frequencies. So on the big group channel here, I've got my high cut and I'm just going to do that. So let's get a good kick pattern going here. It doesn't have to be too active, but let's see what we got. I'm going to emphasize those down beats and then try to get some kind of bounce going here. And I'm just going along, duplicating the same sample across the timeline. Didn't want to do that. Command Z is your friend. Didn't really want that, but that sounded pretty good. Now we can take things a little bit off the grid. Right click, turn the grid off. Maybe I want this to be a little bit late. Put the grid back on to quarter notes. Maybe actually go to eighth notes. Notice how that's giving me more lines and subdivisions to work with. I want a little bounce kick after that. Dop up. Want that to come a little bit quicker, so let me go to 16th notes. Want that here. I'm working on this grid. You don't want to be working too free off the grid, especially if you're just starting out. The grid is your friend. And like I said, we can go a little sparse with this kick. And I'm just building up this 4-bar loop. Now obviously the goal is to make a full track. But we got to start somewhere. So let's build up the ethos of our track, the main sound of it. Let's build that up and let's think about structure later. So I'm trying to find a way to do a little bit of a quicker kick here. I might have to shorten the sample like this. And I don't want to cut it off too much. Let's hear how that sounds. Alright, that's a simple enough kick pattern for now. We've got our basic kick snare, we've got that shaker carrying our groove as well, and we're good to go there. Now, the drums might be a little bit too loud. I'm going to bring them down a little bit. Let's go back and look at our piano. I have something I want to try. So we've got our basic piano chord progression obviously going, but I'm going to duplicate this track. So now we've got two instances of this piano running. And what I'm going to do in the second one, I'm going to double click into it. I'm going to select all the notes and I'm going to hit Shift up on my keyboard. What you'll hear is a higher octave. I'm going to go up one more octave, see how that sounds. It sounds fine, but the purpose of me doing this is I want to create some atmosphere. I don't just necessarily want two pianos happening. What I really want to do is crank the reverb on this track. And now, if I turn the size up, we've got this sort of mystical higher piano. I'm going to get low frequencies out of it because we've got lots of low frequencies in our original piano. And I just want this floating on top. I've got a utility on here, which is an Ableton Live device. I'm just going to add some width to it to spread it across. Now if I unsolo this, we've got the combination of these two pianos setting the tone. Now, like I said, these are just the starting chord progressions in the pack, but you can go ahead and make them your own by adding notes or adding any type of movement in them, and I'll show you what I mean. Let's try to create some movement and add some notes in on top. So I'm thinking about how each one of these chords has 1, 2, 3, 4 voices throughout. So let me see if I can actually add a little bit of movement here. So I'm going to shorten this note, then I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to play with adding some other notes. That note didn't sound too good. Actually, let's go up one more. Yeah, so I want to create this pattern where I'm taking that top note and I'm almost creating like another melody with it. So let's hear that. A little higher. If I turn the headphones on here, I can actually preview the notes. That's the note I want. So I definitely want to switch something up here, probably this note going down. And notice I'm not making this too complicated. I'm literally dividing these in half. So don't go too crazy with your rhythm if you don't quite understand what you're doing just yet. I know that this is going to loop around, right? And my next note here is a D. So let me create this voice so that it leads up to that D. So we'd probably go from a C. This sounds pretty decent, but I think I can get this to sound a little more natural as well by making these chords rolled. What do I mean by rolled? I mean, they're not all going to come in, boom, right on the downbeat. I want them to come in a little bit after each other. So I'm going to start with the last chord to accomplish this actually, and I'm going to highlight all the notes that land on that downbeat. And actually, I'm only going to highlight the top notes because the root note can always hit the downbeat, but let's have the top notes come in slowly after. I'm going to turn my grid off for this, and I'm selecting those notes, and I'm just using the arrow key. Maybe I'll tap 2, 3 times to the right, select the top 2 notes now, 1, 2, 3, 3 times to the right, and the last note 2, 3, 4. So you see that I've created this sort of upward staircase or downward staircase pattern, and let's hear what that sounds like. Let me solo it so we can hear it a little bit better. Rolled chords just sound a little bit better to me for this vibe, rather than that downbeat. It's subtle and we can do it to a higher degree. So let's keep going and do it for this next chord. Now what I'm paying attention to as well, if I push this too far and these notes clash, it'll actually delete the note. I don't want to do that. So I just hit back really quick. That only of course matters if you have the same note in the previous chord. So I'm moving right through, same thing. I'm not being super precise. I'm just tapping. I'm using my eyes. We'll go back and listen to it in a bit, making sure I'm not deleting any notes that I don't want to delete. Same thing here. Leaving that root note on the downbeat and moving these other notes over to have a rolled chord sound. Just a little more natural. And that's what these chord packs, that's where the magic is really. You, of course, can just drop in a stock chord progression, throw it on the timeline and use it as it is. But you can also dive in a little deeper and make it your own in really, really simple ways. Adding notes, changing the timing, different things like that. Making a duplicate version to create some type of atmosphere. And when we play that all together, we have the basis of what could be a really cool lo-fi track. There's one other way we can actually use this Midi for our track, and it is to make a bass line. I'll show you what I mean. A very simple bass line, at least. So I have this empty Midi track here. Let's throw a bass on it. So the other thing I recommend that you do is there's this user library tab that you can add different instruments or different effects racks to, things that you use all the time. So I've started to do that, I'm trying to get more organized about it. But in my user library, if I type bass, I'll actually find the bass plugin that I use all the time. If I drop that in here, and this just speeds up the process. I don't have to go looking for, all right, what was that bass sound I used in that other project? I really liked it. Once I start using something more than once, I tend to put it in my user library. It becomes part of my sound. Not to say I'll use it every time, but occasionally. So this is just a bass from Arturia, another Arturia sound here. What I'm going to do now is, even though this is a bass line, I'm going to hold Options and drag up my piano MIDI. Now, why am I dragging up the piano MIDI? Because these notes, these chords, are for the most part in root position, meaning that I can take the root note of each chord and use it for my bass line. And what that means is I can highlight all of these notes on top, delete them, and now I have a bass line that will go along with my track. So let me just listen back. This should sound pretty good. We might have to adjust the range though. I think it sounds pretty good. It's obviously very simple. The same way we did this with melodies, let me turn my grid back on. We did this with the piano chords, I should say. We can add in notes. So I'm going to shrink this note. And for that, this beat right here, beat 4, see 3.4, bar 3, beat 4. I'm going to duplicate this note. Obviously, it's a bass line. I don't want it hanging over like this, so let me just make it fit that one beat. Let's add a little passing note. Easiest way to do this is to add notes in between where you started and where you're going. So let's hear how that sounds. It's leading in that direction, so it sounds pretty good. Now here, we could add another passing note if we wanted to keep up with this pattern. So let me go ahead and shrink that. Easy way, I could just duplicate this note, shrink it up so it's one beat long. And now, instead of it being a note in between, because actually this note in between doesn't fit in our key, let's actually go for the note right above it. that's in key, which is F sharp. So we're using these sort of neighboring notes to lead into our next note and to add a little bit of complexity. Now this is a very, very simple bass line. Let's try to use these chords one more time to add one additional instrument. I'm actually going to duplicate the reverberated version. And we're going to change the synth. We're going to change some things about this. I'm going to cut the reverb back a little bit. I'm going to bring this down 1 octave, which will put me in a range that's between where the normal piano is playing and where the higher reverb is playing. And let me go ahead and add an arpeggiator. Now, instead of us hearing just the chord, now we're going to hear each note of the chord played through. I'll show you what I mean. Midi effects, arpeggiator, dropping it on this track. Let's solo that. Solo this. So now we're getting this kind of pattern. Now in the arpeggiator, we can change things like the direction. Let's go down. We can change the rate, which is pretty good. Now, one thing I think would be interesting in this MIDI would be to get rid of the bass note, because it's kind of standing out. We can even add octaves to this, or steps. If we play with the direction, we can go up and down. Now, we've used a lot of piano already in this project, so why don't we just swap out the sound? We can keep this same track, and we can add something as simple as a basic operator, one of Live's synths. I'm just going to drop this on the piano, which will replace the piano and give us this very simple synth sound. I'm just rolling off some more highs. I'll probably take out some more lows. And now we've got this synth that's following along with our chord progression. It doesn't sound half bad. Same thing we did before. You can add complexity to this. Add more notes that you think could sound good. So could we add a G on top here? Could we have this go down to an F sharp? And let's just add a top note to each of these chords. So I just duplicated that note across. That should sound good. That doesn't sound so good, so let's find a note that's maybe closer to this note here. Probably bring it down in the mix, and if we didn't like that sound, we could swap it out with something else down the road as well. But now we've got this pretty nice sounding lo-fi groove here. I'm going to add one more thing, which is effects wise, which is some sidechain compression, which is going to be applying a compressor to all the instrument tracks to get a pumping sound from our kick drum. So I've put the compressor here on the shaker, right? Now if I expand it out, I check sidechain, audio from kick, fantastic. And if I hit play, we'll see the kick come through. See that peak? Now to get it to react, let's bring the threshold down to say minus 30. But now I take this sidechain and I copy it. I maybe put it on my bass, which is slightly controversial. I can bring down the dry wet on the bass specifically, but on the piano, I'll leave it at 100% wet. I'm just going through each of my instruments and pasting this sidechain compressor on here. And now let's listen to the difference. Everything is reacting to the kick drum. Even though it's a little sparse, you can still hear that pump, which is very, very common in lo-fi music. Now this is just a 4-bar loop, but there is a way we can take this 4-bar loop and make it slightly more complex, expand it out, and get almost a full track out of these initial sounds. And I'm going to do that in a part 2 of this video, so stay tuned for that. All right, so thank you for tuning in to part 1 of this music production process uncut and explained series. I hope you did enjoy it. Stay tuned for part 2 because we're going to add layers of complexity to this beat. It might not seem like much right now, but we will build this into a full track. Make sure you check the link in the description so you can take advantage of Unison's new free chord pack, which of course we used to build up the track today. I want to thank Unison again for sponsoring this video, and like I said before, subscribe, turn notifications on. You don't want to miss the next 2 parts of this little series here. For now, this has been TAETRO, your electronic music mentor. Have a good one.